Hello. Thank you. So, I want to talk to you today about routing. So, by the way, to people who are viewing this online afterwards and wondering why there's a random circle throughout on my slides, it's because my slides are dark and the room's very dark, so I made a spotlight. But that won't make sense if you don't see any video of it. So, just quickly, first of all, I'd like to do a quick shout out to a couple of people. I'd like to shout out to Joachim, who has organised Ember Fest for the last 2 years, and unfortunately, it had to get cancelled this year. But I hope it does come back in the future. It just didn't get enough subscribers, and I think it was. I think it's hopeful that it's been a great conference, and it will continue to be in the future. I'd also like to shout out to Lox, who's he's my last compatriot in IRC and also on Slack helping people out loads, and he's not here either, unfortunately, but thanks to him for helping everyone out in the community who's got questions. So everyone knows Ember routing is great, but the router is complex and often misunderstood. But in this talk, I want to show you how simple things are simple, hard things are possible, and also kind of talk about how nesting is misused. Root nesting is one of the most complex concepts to understand when you're new to Ember, especially if you've come from some other framework that has the concept of nested roots like Rails. It works completely differently. What's in this talk is relatively basic stuff, but hopefully there will be something new for everyone. So what we're going to do is we're going to build Tomster Mail. I'm showing almost all of the code, all the relevant code, certainly. There are also some videos of introduction, but there isn't that much code because it's Ember, so there isn't really that much code. So what's in the initial commit? We've got an email model, Ember data model, just to provide some basic data, some factories to fake the content of that data, Bootstrap because I can't do real CSS. Some minor CSS changes, and the Ember Data filter add-on because that's gone from Ember Data, right, apparently. And that's basically it. So this is pretty much a clean app. So starting off with the kind of non-nested version, in your roots, you've just got 2 roots. They're not nested, mailbox and email. We've got the application template, which just links to the various mailboxes. And we've got the mailbox route and template, really simple, just filters down the mailbox by emails. And we've also got the template for the mailbox, which just shows a list of emails in a table. And we've got template.hbs for the email, which just shows the email subject from to body. That's all I'm kind of skimming through those because it's not really that relevant. They're kind of basic and they're what you'd expect. This is the root tree for our application at this point. So really simple application root with 3 subroots. And this is what it looks like. So nice and simple, you can click through and see the emails, and they're listed on separate page to the list of emails. So, not nested at all, not a nested UI, not nested routes. But one thing you might have noticed there, or maybe not, but I'll point it out, is that the links to each mailbox didn't stay active when you clicked an email. And that's kind of annoying. If you're looking at an email in a mailbox, you want to see what mailbox that email's in. So you can make some really small changes to fix that problem. You can see here we're just nesting the email route under the mailbox route. And also, the thing to point out here is that previously you had 2 routes, and now you've got 3 routes because ignoring the application route and index route. But here in the second example, you have the mailbox route, the email route, and the mailbox.index route. So just moving those files around. So you move the email pod into the mailbox pod because the pod's nested the same as the routes. You move the mailbox template, what was the mailbox, into the mailbox index template. And when you remove the mailbox template, because it's a parent route, it's now an implicit outlet. So if there's nothing there, if there's no template file there, it's just treated as a file with literally an outlet and nothing else in it. And now you can see our route graph is starting to get slightly more complex. There's a lot more structure there just from moving one route inside the other. And this is what it looks like now. You'll notice that when you go into an email, even though it's on a separate page, the mailbox route is highlighted as active still. So let's go to a more realistic nested UI, more complex. What we're hoping to achieve here is something like a bit more like Apple Mail, maybe, where you've got mailboxes listed and you've got emails listed and you can view an email at the same time. This is really simple to do, obviously. Ember makes nesting really easy. So you move the mailbox index template back up to where it was before in the mailbox template, and you just add an outlet. And right away, just by doing that, you get this lovely complex nested UI. So, I mean, this is kind of where we're at now, is kind of the basics of route nesting. I think pretty much everyone who's done an Ember project will kind of know this by the end of their first day doing Ember. But this is the same structure again. But what some people sometimes don't realize, at least at first, is that you've now got some dangling indexes. So you've got these index routes that with nothing on them, and you don't have to put anything on them, but sometimes people don't even realize that they're there. So let's just add a bit of content into those indexes. You might as well put something there, you put some branding there or something, or just some helpful text to the user. I often find in this situation where I'm creating these index routes, they're like a great place to explain stuff to the user. I mean, users, as a developer, it's kind of sometimes hard to see if users, see it from the perspective of the user and see exactly what they don't know. So just telling people what they should do at this point is often a useful case for these. So, I've just put welcome to Tomster Mail and select a mailbox to get started, and then select an email. And that's kind of filling in your route tree, making sure everything has a template, and it can be quite useful. While we're talking about implicit routes, I'm just going to take an aside into other implicit routes which you get, which is loading and error substates. So all of your routes that are parent routes have also a loading substate and an error substate. This is just really useful to make your UI a bit more professional and make it handle the realistic failure scenarios and just slowness scenarios that the web throws at you. So let's just add in these templates. So I'm going to add an application loading template. It's just just says loading and it's got a refresh spinner icon thing. But I'm also adding the nested templates for mailbox error and mailbox loading. Application applies globally, and child substates apply only to their children. So the mailbox loading and error only shows up for errors loading child routes of mailbox. So it won't show up when mailbox is loading, but it will show up when child routes of mailbox load. So in our case, that's the email route. So let's just show that off. So you can see you've got a loading indicator, and then when you go to an email, you get loading. And if we then go to email doesn't exist, get the application loading, then the email loading, and then the error loading. So that's kind of really simple way to add some kind of basic failure scenario handling. And in this example, I've shown the loading and error substate routes in the graph. You can see there's actually quite a lot of them. In all these implicit routes, they exist kind of for all your routes, and usually you kind of just ignore them, but you can add in different messages and different handling at each level of the tree. Poor misunderstood index. It's not just for lists. Lots of people who are used to index in the sense of the web, or expect index page to be for your list, especially if you're like coming from maybe Rails or something where the index of your resource is always a collection. But the index route is just the initial state, really, in the Ember router. So what I'm going to do here is, obviously, if you've got a mail client, you want to be able to edit your drafts. Otherwise, you're going to send something that you didn't mean to send. So let's add an edit route to this email route, and we're getting more and more complex here. We've now got the email parent route, email edit child route of an email index child route. So you can be in either of those states when you're looking at an email. And some code here. So the email template now, the edit email template, sorry, has a text area to edit the email and save button. The email index template has the body of the email, and we're now putting an outlet in the email template. But we're still having that header information, because even when you're editing the email, you probably want some information about it. So we're kind of splitting up what was in the email template into two states now. And you can now see if you go to edit an email, so you've got that text box, and you go back to the index state after saving it. So you can really exploit these index routes for states that are substates, whilst not changing the parent route, because the model is obviously inherited. So I'm now going to talk about render template. Render template is usually a mistake, except when it's not. So what do I mean by that? So the render template hook is one of the hooks that gets called in all of your Ember routes to figure out what should be displayed on the screen for this state of the application. It's quite common to abuse this and to try and kind of render things in places that they weren't intended to be rendered, and kind of break out of the nesting of your router. And really, that's kind of breaking the default stuff that Ember gives you in a lot of ways. It's quite easy to give yourself subtle bugs by kind of trying to render into a parent template of the template that you're looking at. So let's add. Let's show a case where I think it's a good way to use this hook. Let's say you want a toolbar on your email app. So we've got this toolbar with some buttons in it. And we're adding, in the application template, we're adding an outlet that is where the toolbar is going to get rendered into. And in the email edit route, what we're going to do is we're going to still do the initial rendering. So we're calling this .super. And obviously that does the default thing which Ember does if this hook isn't defined, which is to render the template with the name of that's the same of the route into the parent template. But we're also doing an additional render. We're rendering the email edit toolbar into the application template, and we're using the toolbar outlet. Now this is this by default uses the same controller that is used for this route. So I mean, obviously this will slightly change with routable components, but at the moment, this is going to be using the email edit controller, so you have access to the same model. It's kind of useful for kind of having a child UI state, being able to kind of reach out to other places in the DOM, and I'm going to kind of talk about what some alternatives to this in a minute. So let's just have a look at what that looks like. So you're going into edit an email, and you see the toolbar pops up right at the top. And the other thing you notice is when you leave that route, this is torn down for you automatically. So I'll just play it again just so you see, you watch out for when you leave, when you click on another email like now to leave, the toolbar disappears. So it kind of Ember handles all that state view. That's kind of a really useful thing to have. So render template is smart, but it actually turns out it's even smarter than that. Let's say you want to add a global toolbar. So you have a toolbar that's kind of there all the time, and in your application route, we're doing the same thing. So we're still calling the default render, but we're rendering the application toolbar instead of the email edit toolbar. And that's all I've added since the previous iteration. But you'll kind of see here that when you go into edit route, it's replaced as you'd expect. When you leave the edit route, it's automatically replaced with what was there before. So that's kind of really useful. So I was actually speaking to Edward Faulkner last night, and there are often better ways to do this. I don't know when necessarily is the best place to use render template instead of this, but the alternative is to use a service and components. So make a service that has the state that the toolbar should be in and render that in the application template with a component. I think that's probably simpler, but I also think that you can get some nice automatic nested kind of behaviors with this render template approach. And the other thing that that he mentioned that I think makes sense as a big no-no is calling render in a route outside of the render template hook. So sometimes you could have a button that causes an action that then causes render to render something into an outlet. But if you do that, you've got kind of this mysterious state hanging around. The router is supposed to map URL state to your template state, and if you're kind of calling random actions all over the place and rendering outside without affecting the URL, then that's kind of bad. Where is that state? What's going on there? So that's kind of something that I would agree that you should avoid. So where are we going next? Ah, yes, everyone hates modals. I mean, that's kind of it says it all for me. I mean, you have to. Every project ends up tending towards an implementation of Lisp, and it has modals. So going to getting kind of to a ridiculous state of nesting now. We're going to add an attachment route, attach route under our edit route, and in that route we're calling render template again. But you notice this time we're not calling super. We're not calling the original render. We're rendering outside of the parent template, and I just told you not to do that. So what's going on there? Basically, we're putting this modal named outlet into the application template, and we're just putting this is just the bootstrap modal stuff. I mean, it's quite verbose, but all that is just some stuff that's nicely styled to look like a modal. So it's all CSS that's making it show up in the middle of the screen and have the backdrop is blacking out the background, and getting kind of ridiculous here. This is now our root tree. It's getting more and more complex. It's actually kind of because it's only one feature. It's looking kind of really wide and really shallow. But it's a real app is going to end up looking more balanced because there will be lots of features in it. So let's show what that looks like. So we go to edit an email, and you click on the attach button, and the modal pops up. So why is this? Oh yeah, and obviously the back button works. So if you go into the attach, you click the attach button, modal comes up. Then you click back. You end up with it automatically being torn down for you as well. It kind of keeps things nice, and I think that in some ways, just keeping everything in sync with the URL through everything kind of makes using render template sometimes easier than using a service-based approach, because it's all kind of managed for you. And I was saying before that you shouldn't use render template to render outside of your outside of the route's normal template. You should always call super. But I think that in this case, the UI is kind of conceptually nested. So you're rendering into a named outlet the DOM that you need, just because of the fact that you need to cover the whole page with a backdrop and make it hide everything. The DOM that you need doesn't end up being actually nested, but conceptually it is nested. It's kind of like the modal could be inside of that child route if it was, if it weren't for the fact that kind of HTML and CSS doesn't quite work like that. So I think that it's okay to render to a named outlet when your UI is conceptually nested, even though it's not really nested. And in my opinion, those are pretty much the only two use cases for render template, and you'll probably end up in a bit of a mess if you end up using it outside of those use cases, because you can end up doing some really gnarly stuff that kind of works in the happy path, but then as soon as you press back at the wrong time, your app will just go to a blank screen. So the last thing I'm going to talk about is the exception that proves the rule. I think that every app needs this at some point. Basically, you've built your email app. It's all great. It's got whizzy modals and it's got toolbars and everything. But suddenly, the CIA director says that he doesn't want everyone reading his emails. Boring. So we better add some sign-in. So what you want is the sign-in route to not show anything. You want it to be completely outside the rest of the UI. And you didn't plan for this. Your application template has a load of gunk in it that you don't want to show. So you could kind of use if statements in your application template to hide the toolbar and the footer and whatever when you're not logged in. But what it's much easier to do is to just add a kind of invisible parent route. So in this example, I'm using the logged in route, and I'm giving it a path of /, so it won't show up in the URL at all. And I'm nesting all of the other routes that I defined previously inside it. And what I've done here is I'm using the reset namespace true option because I'm lazy. Basically, it would be a lot, it would be perfectly legitimate and probably advisable, I'd say, to actually keep the pods nested in the same way that your routes are, just to keep everything consistent. But because I didn't want to rename all of these routes and stuff and go through all of the templates, rename all of the, handle all of the link tos that have now changed to have a logged in front of them, you can just change the nesting and set reset namespace to true, and it remains the same as it was. So, it's kind of useful to avoid, if you end up adding this halfway, in a big app, you don't really want this giant commit that's going and touching every single template where you have a link to and moving every single file around. And then obviously adding the sign-in route at the bottom, which is outside of all of that. And then what you have to do, obviously, move the application template to be the logged in template. And because there's no application template anymore, it's going to be the implicit, just an outlet and nothing else. So getting to the most ridiculous state of all our routes, we've got this massive tree with only the sign-in route directly under application. Everything else is scoped under logged in with all our nice UI on it. Let's see how that looks. So yeah, we've got a nice sign-in box and log out. And oh, oops, I didn't really implement authentication, so we can still read what the CI director is saying as much as we want. The takeaways. What do I think are the most important things that I'd like people to take away from this talk? First, I'd like to say root nesting is equal to template nesting. But note that's a double equals, not a triple equals. So it's kind of root nesting is mostly kind of JavaScript-y equal to template nesting. It's kind of duck equal. But I think that root nesting should be triple equal to UI nesting. I think that conceptually your UI and the way you nest it should match up to how you've prepared your routes. Because if it's not, then you're probably going to end up with some bugs. Render template is usually the wrong approach. So usually most of your routes shouldn't have render template defined until it's not, until you need one of those specific use cases, which I think are good use cases for it. Index route is not just for lists. It can do index route is really just initial state, and you can put whatever you want on there. And often, like the most common use for index routes that I find is actually show routes. I often find that the parent route is going to have the list on it, and then the nested index route is going to have an individual item showing. And just a note, all of these route visualization trees are from Ember Diagonal, which is a route visualization tool I made in the hack day of the Ember Fest, like last year or the year before, I can't remember. That's just been updated to output Ember CLI compatible advice rather than the old global style advice. So you can just copy and paste your router code into there and explore all the routes and figure out what's going on in your application. That's it. So anyone, I think I've got like 2 minutes left. Does anyone want any questions? No? Okay, thanks everyone.